3 months ago, a dealership in my town handed me a repair invoice for $1,200. The service advisor looked me straight in the eye and told me my catalytic converter was finished, dead, beyond saving. He said if I drove the car another week without replacing it, I'd fail emissions, I'd lose fuel economy, and eventually the engine itself would start suffering. I paid the diagnostic fee. I took the paperwork. I walked out of that dealership without scheduling the repair. 2 days later, I drove that same car onto a quiet stretch of highway outside town. I drove it for exactly 20 minutes. I came home, parked it in my driveway, and I waited. On the morning of the third day, the check engine light turned itself off. That was over 9,000 miles ago. The light has never come back on. The converter is still working. The dealership never got a single dollar from me. What I used that afternoon wasn't a magic spray from an auto parts store. It wasn't an expensive scan tool. It wasn't some shady Italian tune-up trick your uncle swears by. It was a documented Japanese engineering technique that has been quietly saving catalytic converters since 1984, and almost nobody in America talks about it. My name is Adrian. This is a car care garage, and what I'm about to show you might be the most valuable 20 minutes of driving you'll ever do. Let me give you the version of this explanation your high school shop teacher skipped. Your catalytic converter sits in the exhaust stream somewhere between your engine and your muffler. From the outside, it looks like a plain metal canister. Nothing impressive. Nothing that suggests the extraordinary chemistry happening inside it every second the engine is running. Cut one open, and you find something that looks almost alien. A ceramic honeycomb. Rows and rows of tiny square channels stacked side by side. Over 1 million individual cells packed into a structure the size of a loaf of bread. Now here is the part most people never learn. Every one of those cells is coated in an invisible layer of 3 precious metals: platinum, palladium, rhodium, metals that cost more per ounce than gold on some days of the year. Metals your car is quietly carrying around underneath the floorboards. These metals are catalysts. That means they trigger a chemical reaction without being consumed by it. When hot exhaust gases wash through those honeycomb cells, the precious metal surfaces convert 3 toxic gases into 2 harmless ones. Carbon monoxide becomes carbon dioxide. Unburned hydrocarbons become water vapor. Nitrogen oxides break apart into plain nitrogen and oxygen. Your car performs this reaction thousands of times every minute you're driving. But here is where the slow death begins. Every engine burns a small amount of oil. Every tank of gasoline contains microscopic contaminants. Every cold morning start pushes partially combusted fuel through the exhaust before the engine has reached operating temperature. Those contaminants don't just pass through the converter and leave. They stick. Carbon deposits, oil ash, fuel residue, phosphorus compounds from your engine oil. They coat the precious metal surfaces cell by cell, month by month, mile by mile. This is not a sudden failure. This is a slow strangulation. And here's the part that costs American drivers thousands of dollars every year. A partially clogged catalytic converter mimics the symptoms of a dozen other problems. Sluggish acceleration that feels like a transmission issue. Rough idle that gets blamed on spark plugs. A sulfur smell mechanics blame on the fuel system. Fuel economy that owners chalk up to bad gas or old age. Meanwhile, the real problem is a honeycomb structure coated in carbon that hasn't seen a proper cleaning in 60,000 miles. But that isn't the interesting part yet. Let me tell you exactly what happened at that dealership. Because this same conversation is happening in service bays across America right now, as you're watching this. The service advisor plugged in the scan tool. He read the code. He came back with a clipboard and a very serious face. He said, "Sir, your code is PU420. Catalyst system efficiency below threshold. Your catalytic converter has failed. You need a new one. Parts and labor, $1,180. With the diagnostic fee, $1,200. Here's what that code actually means. The oxygen sensor downstream of your catalytic converter is reporting that the converter isn't cleaning exhaust gases efficiently enough to meet the threshold programmed into your car's computer. That is all it means. It does not mean the converter is physically broken. It does not mean the ceramic substrate has melted. It does not mean the shell has cracked or the honeycomb has collapsed. In the vast majority of cases, especially in vehicles under 150,000 miles that haven't suffered a serious engine problem, that code simply means the converter is dirty. The precious metals are coated. The reaction is suppressed. The downstream sensor notices. That's the whole story. A former dealership service manager in Cleveland once told an industry trade publication that catalytic converter replacements are among the highest margin repairs in any dealership service department. The part costs the dealer between $200 and $400 wholesale. Labor takes under an hour. The customer pays over $1,000. That math works out beautifully for the shop, catastrophically for you. But here is what makes it worse. Most service technicians are not lying to you out of malice. They're working from a diagnostic flowchart. The flowchart says, code P0420, check oxygen sensors. If the sensors are good, replace the catalytic converter. The flowchart does not include a step that says, try a sustained highway drive first. Because the flowchart was written by people who profit from replacements, not from repairs. A mechanic named Gary, who runs an independent shop in Ohio, told me something I've thought about almost every day since. He said, most clogged converters I see could have been saved with one proper highway drive at the right RPM. Instead, the customer creeps here at 40 miles per hour on city streets. I plug in the scanner, I see the code, I write the estimate. Nobody has time to road test a car for 20 minutes at high RPM. Nobody gets paid for that. Nobody gets paid for that. Let that sit for a moment. This is the part of the story where things get interesting. Stay with me, because everything you are about to hear is the foundation of why the whole method works. In 1984, Japanese automotive engineers were working with the first generation of modern three-way catalytic converters. This technology was still relatively young. They were studying converter longevity, watching how these components aged in real-world driving conditions across different cities and different climates, and they documented something that would quietly influence factory maintenance guidelines for the next 40 years. During high load, sustained highway driving, they found that catalytic converter internal temperatures regularly climbed above 800 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, carbon deposits did not just burn slowly, they combusted almost completely. The precious metal surfaces came out the other side clean and fully reactive. The converter had essentially cleaned itself. Toyota and Subaru technical documents from the late 1980s reference this phenomenon directly. Engineers noticed that vehicles used mostly for short urban trips showed dramatically accelerated converter degradation. Vehicles that regularly saw highway use lasted far longer, sometimes double the mileage before any efficiency loss became measurable. The short trip cars were running cold, never reaching the thermal threshold needed to self-clean. The highway cars were accidentally running a regenerative cleaning cycle every single time they merged onto a freeway. Here's the chemistry in simple terms. Carbon deposits are essentially unburned hydrocarbons that have polymerized onto metal surfaces. At low exhaust temperatures, below about 400 degrees Celsius, these deposits are stable. They stick. They accumulate. Nothing happens to them. But above roughly 650 degrees Celsius, those polymer chains begin to break apart. The carbon oxidizes. The deposits convert into carbon dioxide and water vapor and exit through the tailpipe as harmless gas. Your catalytic converter was literally designed to reach these temperatures. The precious metal substrate operates most efficiently between 400 and 900 degrees Celsius. The problem is, most American drivers never give it the chance. Short trips, low speeds, gentle acceleration, city traffic. The converter warms up, does partial work, cools down before it ever reaches cleaning temperature, and accumulates another thin layer of deposits every single day. 40 years of Japanese engineering documentation quietly confirms what your catalytic converter has been trying to tell you the entire time. It needs to get hot, really hot, consistently. And most of you have never let it. This is the section you actually came here for. I'm going to walk you through this exactly the way I did it, exactly the way the engineering logic supports. Before you touch the key, one thing must happen first. Pull your oil dipstick. Look at what's on the end of it. If your oil is dark, black, and sitting below the minimum mark, stop right now. Do an oil change first. Running this protocol with degraded oil will push additional phosphorus and ash compounds through your exhaust and coat the very surfaces you are trying to clean. Fresh oil matters. Also check your coolant temperature. You're about to ask your engine to work harder than normal for a sustained period. Now is not the time to discover a cooling system problem. If your basic maintenance is current, here's the protocol. Step 1. Find a highway or a long open road where you can legally and safely sustain 60 to 70 miles per hour. Not a residential street, not a school zone. Step 2. Let your engine reach full operating temperature before you begin. The temperature gauge should be sitting in its normal position, and it should have been there for at least 5 minutes. Do not begin this protocol from a cold start. A cold converter hit suddenly with extreme heat can experience thermal shock. You want a gradual temperature rise, not a shock. Step 3. Once you are at highway speed and fully warmed up, drop one gear manually. If you're driving an automatic with a manual mode or paddle shifters, use them. If you drive a manual, drop from 5th to 4th or 6th to 5th. The goal is to raise your engine RPM to between 3,000 and 3,500 while maintaining 60 to 65 miles per hour. This is the sweet spot. High enough to generate serious exhaust heat, not so high that you're screaming the engine. Step 4. Hold that RPM range for a full 20 minutes without stopping. No red lights, no exit ramps, no slowing for construction. The sustained heat is the entire point. Every time you slow down and let the exhaust cool, you interrupt the process, and the deposits restabilize. Step 5. Do not turn the car off immediately when you finish. Drive normally for at least 5 more minutes at lower speeds. This allows the converter to cool gradually. Rapid cool down after extreme heat can cause microcracks in the ceramic honeycomb over time. That is the complete protocol. 20 minutes, no parts, no tools, no appointment. The most common mistake people make is trying to do this on city streets by revving the engine at red lights. That is not the same thing. It actually causes more harm than good. Revving a stationary engine pushes unburned fuel into the exhaust without the flow rate that highway driving creates. You need both the heat and the flow. Only highway speed generates both at the same time. The second most common mistake is doing this once and expecting a miracle. If your converter has been accumulating deposits for 60,000 miles of city driving, one session will help. It probably won't completely restore it. For a seriously clogged converter, repeat this protocol 3 times over 2 weeks. Each session burns away another layer, but this isn't even the biggest part of the method. Now we're stepping into the part of this story that makes some people uncomfortable. Stay with me. The chemistry is real and the results are documented. There is a fuel additive method that, when combined with the heat cycle protocol, dramatically accelerates the process. It doesn't come in a bottle with a race car on the label. It doesn't cost $30 at the parts counter. It's lacquer thinner. Specifically, acetone-based lacquer thinner, the kind you buy at a hardware store for around $8 a quart. Before you assume this sounds insane, let me walk through the chemistry. Lacquer thinner is a blend of solvents, primarily acetone, toluene, and methyl ethyl ketone. When added to gasoline in precise small quantities, these solvents alter combustion in 2 useful ways. First, they slightly raise combustion temperature, meaning the exhaust gases entering your converter arrive hotter than normal. Second, and more importantly, they act as a solvent carrier inside the combustion chamber itself, breaking down carbon deposits before they even reach the converter. The exact ratio is 2 ounces of acetone-based lacquer thinner per 10 gallons of fuel. Not more. Ever. The goal is a slight solvent presence, not a change in fuel chemistry. Too much lacquer thinner can damage rubber fuel components. 2 ounces per 10 gallons sits well below any threshold of concern. Add the lacquer thinner to your tank before filling with gasoline so it mixes thoroughly. Then run the heat cycle exactly as described. What does this feel like from inside the car? For the first few minutes, nothing dramatic. Around the 8 to 12 minute mark of the drive, if your converter was significantly clogged, you may notice a brief sulfur smell from the exhaust. Some people say it smells like a rotten egg for about 90 seconds. Others say it smells like a distant campfire. It passes. That smell is 40,000 miles of accumulated deposits burning off the substrate in real time. One critical warning. Do not use lacquer thinner in a vehicle rated for E85 ethanol. The solvent chemistry interacts differently with ethanol-heavy fuels. Standard gasoline vehicles, including E10 rated, which is essentially every car on American roads, are fine at the 2-ounce ratio. Here is the honest answer. You will not know immediately. The check engine light was triggered by the downstream oxygen sensor. That sensor is comparing the oxygen content of exhaust entering the converter to the oxygen content leaving it. A clean converter consumes oxygen aggressively. A dirty one lets too much pass through. After your heat cycle, the computer needs several drive cycles to reevaluate. The light does not disappear the moment you park. For most vehicles, if the method worked, the light extinguishes on its own within 2 to 4 days of normal driving. Not instant. 2 to 4 days. Mine turned off on the second day. I've heard from people whose lights took 4. One man emailed me to say it took 5 days and then he panicked, and then it went off on day 6. Patience. While you wait, there are physical signs to check. The idle should smooth out. If you have a subtle stumble at idle for months, it usually disappears. Acceleration in the mid-RPM range should feel stronger. Some people describe it as feeling like a new engine. I'd say it feels more like someone finally opened a window that had been stuck shut for 2 years. I want to be straight with you. This channel doesn't hide the limits of what it recommends. The heat cycle works on clogged converters. It does not work on physically destroyed ones, and you need to know the difference. Physical destruction happens in specific scenarios. First, impact damage. Your converter sits low. A serious hit from road debris or a curb strike can crack the internal ceramic. If your check engine light came on within a day of hitting something hard, do not run the protocol. Get under the car and inspect the shell. Second, coolant contamination. If your head gasket has failed and coolant is entering combustion, silicate compounds glaze the substrate permanently. The symptoms include sweet-smelling white smoke that doesn't clear. Fix the head gasket first. Third, oil consumption damage. If your engine burns more than a quart of oil per 1,000 miles, the phosphorus in that oil is actively poisoning your converter. The heat cycle can slow this. It cannot overcome an active contamination source. Here's the part that saves you from having this conversation with yourself again in 3 years. Once every week, take your car on a 20-minute highway drive, not 55 behind a delivery truck, a genuine 60 to 70 mile per hour drive, in a gear that puts your RPM between 2,500 and 3,000. That's it. That is the entire prevention protocol. You are simply allowing your converter to reach the temperature range it was designed for. You are doing what Japanese engineers documented in 1984. If your life genuinely doesn't allow weekly highway driving, run the lacquer thinner treatment at the 2-ounce ratio every 6 months. The difference between maintenance and repair is usually about $900. 3 months ago, a dealership told me my catalytic converter was dead and quoted me $1,200. I drove home. I checked my oil. I found a long empty highway. I drove for 20 minutes at 3,000 RPM. I repeated it twice over the following 2 weeks. On the second day, after the third run, the check engine light shut off by itself while I was sitting at a red light. I actually laughed out loud in the car. That converter is still working today. 9,000 miles later, the light has not returned. Total cost, $0 and about 60 minutes of driving. That is what Car Care Garage exists for. Not to sell you products, not to pretend every repair needs a shop visit. The information gap between what mechanics know and what drivers know is costing American car owners billions of dollars every year. And most of the time, closing that gap costs nothing but the willingness to understand what your car is actually telling you. If this video just saved you a 4-figure repair bill, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who's been quoted a crazy number recently. Before you go, our next video exposes the oil change interval myth that's quietly destroying engines that should easily last 300,000 miles. Watch it before your next oil change. You need to hear this one.